Hey everyone, it's Dr. Teralyn here. I'm just going to do another shout out for my book before we start this episode. So check out Your Best Brain on Amazon.com.
It's there.
And it's there. And I
Mhm.
want to show you chapter 9, page 119. Life is so damn short. Just do what makes you happy. And don't forget to shout Jenga when everything falls apart.
Jenga. Oh.
Jenga.
Just so everyone knows, this is a perfect stocking stuffer, whether it's for a birthday or for Christmas, or you're putting together
Mother's
a donation
Day.
package.
Oh,
Mother's
yeah.
Day. I may have bought 5 copies already for different things. So get it. I know.
She did. She put it in
I
a
did.
donation
I
basket for a
did
charity
for a
event, which I really
nonprofit,
appreciate.
for a charity
Yes.
event. I made a
So
whole
good.
brain health basket. The book is in
So
there. So I'm
good.
telling
Yep.
it's very versatile.
Here it
It's
is.
very good for bathroom reading as well.
And short. So
Mhm.
you'll
Look at
get
this.
it through in
Mhm.
one fell swoop. All right. Thanks everyone. Thanks for your support on Your Best Brain. 5-star reviews only. All right. Now
That's
on to the
right.
show.
That's right. Okay, everybody. So here we go. Super excited about today. Are we all mad in America? Listen, are you gaslit by bad science and bad psychiatry? We are
was.
your whistleblowing shrinks, Dr. Teralyn and Therapist Jenn, here with probably the ultimate whistleblowing shrink. Just want to put that out there. And this is not quite, kind of. He's the ultimate whistleblower. Let's say it that way. And this is a
Yes.
Gaslit Truth podcast. Our special guest today is Bob Whitaker, and he is the author of several books on the history of psychiatry. He's written Mad in America. He has written The Anatomy of an Epidemic, and he's the founder of Mad in America, which is like the world's largest platform for science, psychiatry, and social justice. And we are huge fans. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Well, thanks for having me here. It's a real pleasure and honor. So looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is great.
I
This is
just have to start
fantastic.
this off by saying, yes, when Jen and I were coming up with this podcast, almost 2 years ago,
Yeah.
Mad in America podcast was our inspiration.
It was.
And so it was. We were like, this podcast is something that we need to lean into and think about it from a different angle. And so your podcast was our inspiration. So thank you so much for that inspiration. You are changing lives. And your book too. This one, I'm holding it up, Mad in America book. Yeah, because this one changed my life and my practice. Just so you know.
Yeah. It's
Mhm.
all true. And actually some of the first like deliverables we ever put out, okay,
Yes.
came
Social media.
from this book. And like all of my like highlighting and underlining see the word what on that page. This actually went into some of our deliverables that we were putting out because I kept reading this going, this is what we have to talk about. This is the stuff that matters. And so thank you for this book, Bob, and for what you're doing.
Yes.
Thanks for that very nice introduction. It was quite flattering. And I just want to say, of course, you were recently on a Mad in America podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, we
Thank
were.
you. Yes, that was
Thanks
so
for having us.
awesome.
And I think really one of the things about podcasts are so great. They really do help build a community of listeners, so to speak. So, and you also sit with the podcasts. You know, you sit down and listen to them, and it really becomes a great way to sort of promote a different narrative or reveal how we have been gaslit by psychiatry and so forth. So anyway, real pleasure to be here.
Yes.
Yay.
So I want to get to the meat of you.
The meat.
Meaning, like,
You
how
better
did
clarify that, Terry.
Yeah.
I mean,
Sorry.
just
Sorry.
let's clarify this, please.
I'm feeling a little edgy this morning.
I know. I mean, he
like,
might be a
I'm
silver
just- I'm
fox, but you got to
starstruck
get it
and-
together here. Okay. All right.
That's funny.
Okay.
We're gonna make Bob lose his mind today. Anyway, so
4 minutes in, he's like,
okay.
"That."
So you're a medical researcher, correct? Is that
No, not really. I'm a journalist who's been writing about medicine and science forever. So
okay? A
so
medical
I'm not
journalist.
actually a
Sorry.
researcher. I don't do the original research, but what I do
You
do, of
report on
course, is report on it and dig into the literature, the research literature. But I'm not a researcher myself.
I'm sorry. I meant journalist when I said that. I'm starstruck today. Like I need to get my language together here. Okay, so you are a medical journalist, which I find really fascinating. Can you share with us your kind of awakening moment? Like, because I'm sure you did traditional reporting, right? And then something had to have happened somewhere along the way. You went, what in the world? Especially with psychiatry. So I would love to hear that. I think that's an important place to begin.
I'll try to be succinct about this because it's a journey when you move from where you initially are treating medical doctors, medical researchers as people on a pedestal, as the fountain of truth, to where next thing you know, you're saying, well, wait a minute, what you're saying to the public isn't consistent with your own science. So really what happened was this, is even when I was doing medical reporting for the Albany Times Union, I began understanding that financial influences were affecting medical research. So that was the beginning of sort of the cataracts disappearing from my eyes. Then I was briefly, I was director of publications at Harvard Medical School in the 1990s. And this was a time when they started talking a lot about, oh, we have to do evidence-based medicine. And the idea with evidence-based medicine is doctors can be deluded about their merits of their therapies based on their own impressions. So there's a sense that science might be a corrective to the narrative that you've been told and you've been listened to. Anyway, then next thing was I co-founded a publishing company that looked at the business of clinical trials, doing trials of new drugs. And very quickly, I began writing about how academic psychiatry was being compromised. Pharmaceutical companies were giving money to academic faculty, academic psychiatrists. They were serving as the authors. Studies were being spun. Adverse events were being hidden. And so that really alerted me to the sense of corruption that was present in psychiatry. Now, it was also starting to become present in other areas of medicine, but psychiatry was really the child, really the poster child of this problem. And then finally, I did a series for the Boston Globe on abuses of patients in psychiatric research. And now at this time, I still believed the chemical imbalance story. I still believed that, for example, they had found that too much dopamine was the cause of schizophrenia. And therefore, that's why you needed antipsychotics, because they block dopamine. Okay. And that was actually the foil for one of this 4-part series. We said, look, it's awful when you do studies where you withdraw patients from antipsychotics, because you would never do this with a diabetic. You would never withdraw insulin from a diabetic to see if they became sick again. But so why are you doing it with schizophrenia patients? The point of this is that I think is important for your readers. I began as a believer in the narrative of progress as represented by the chemical imbalance. But I had these other sort of skepticism that was beginning to enter my thinking. And then while doing those series, I came upon 2 studies that really launched me into this long history of writing critically about psychiatry. One was a study by Harvard researchers who said that schizophrenia outcomes, rather than improving over the last 15, 20 years, had worsened. And now they were no better than in the first third of the 20th century. Well, that belies that narrative of progress we were being told.
Yep.
Then I came upon studies by the World Health Organization, which compared outcomes in 3 developing countries, India, Colombia, and Nigeria, versus outcomes in the US and 6 other developed countries. One was 2 years in length, one was 5 years in length. The diagnosis was made by Western doctors, and each time they found the outcomes were much, much better in the developing countries. So much so they concluded that living in a developed country is a strong predictor you won't have a good outcome if you're diagnosed with schizophrenia. So I said, why would that be? And then I read the studies. And what they did is, after the first such study, they said, well, maybe the reason for the better outcomes is in the poor countries or the developing countries is they take their medications. They're more medication compliant. So they looked at medication usage in the second study, and what they found was this. In the developing countries, they used the drugs acutely, short term, but not chronically. Only about 16% were maintained on the drugs long term. And that's what blew my mind, because my understanding was schizophrenia was due to a chemical imbalance. The drugs fixed that chemical imbalance. The drugs were absolutely essential. And yet here was a study, 2 different studies challenging that narrative. So anyway, when after that series ran, I got a contract to write Mad in America. And I began really with this thought: is the narrative that we're being told, is it true? Is it indeed based in science? And if you go forward with that book, it's really about a history of psychiatry telling one story to make itself look good, and
Yeah.
patients living a very different
Mhm.
history. So that's a
Yes.
long-winded answer, but I think for your listeners, what's key is I began as a believer, number one. Two, nevertheless, I did think that we needed to go into the research. I needed to go into the research literature to see if what we were being told was in sync with the research literature. So I had a process to follow as I wrote Mad in America.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mad in America, the book. I have so many, I don't know, not conflicting emotions, but I have to be in a space to read it. Like, I have to be in
Yes.
an okay place to read it. And when I say read it, I usually listen to it on an airplane or taking a walk or whatever. And I had to do it in small chunks because it questions everything that I thought I knew, but I didn't know much, actually. I think this book should be a requirement for
Yes.
high school psychology
Yes.
class. I think it should be a requirement for
College.
college
For
psychology
for sure.
courses. Like,
That's the exact same
yes.
thing. When I read this,
Mhm.
Bob, I had a couple things pop in, and same thing with Terry. I had such a hard time reading this because it's all stuff I've learned for the first time. And this is, after multiple
Mhm.
degrees and in internships and licenses and years and years of practicing and all of the trainings that we have to do, right, in the field as psychologists or therapists, right? And it was like I was learning this all for the first time. And something that really stood out to me in this is that I kept thinking to myself, why did I never learn this side of it? It was one of the first times I
Mhm.
realized how convoluted and one sided even the Western education system is. And that really blew my mind because I'm like, shit, everything I've learned, like this was not part of it. Even when we learned about asylums, this is not how we learned
Yeah.
about asylum living. When we learned about psychiatry trying to bring themselves into the field as doctors and make a name for themselves, which you talk a lot about in this book, and the ability to like do these crazy ass brain surgeries and craniotomies and all these things, right? Like we didn't learn any of that. We learned about Phineas Gage and a stupid spike that went through his head and severing a corpus
She
callosum.
always talks about
I know, and I'm
Phineas
like, this
Gage.
is the dumbest shit because here, like, this is we were. I had a hard time with it because this is what actually not a hard time. It was a hard time, but it got me to a good spot where I went. I have to unlearn what I've learned because I've only
Mhm.
learned like this much.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I can understand. I hear this a lot from people. First of all, there is a sense of betrayal
Yes.
in everything.
Yes.
Why
Yes.
wasn't I taught this
Yes.
information? Why was this information kept from me? And I'm investing, if you're a therapist, you're investing your life, your heart,
Yeah.
your future in a certain narrative. By that I mean, as you're being told as you go to school, we do this and it's evidence-based and it's good for people. And you're invested in that. And then all of a sudden you read Mad in America and you see that that story that you've been invested in is a story told by a guild that is interested all along about making itself look good and making sure that its products, drugs, look good. And
Yeah.
so what they do is
Yes.
they exclude information, they exclude research results that call that into question and frankly tell of harm done. And of course, the reason they do that because, well, what happens if their drugs are doing harm in aggregate? Well, then what are they left with?
Yeah.
So psychiatry gets in this bind where, and you can see this through in history, whatever they're doing, they're going to say is good. When they were doing lobotomies after Phineas Gage,
I
that
know,
was so
right?
Yes.
the
Mhm.
inventor won the Nobel Prize in medicine. And in 1949, I think it was, there was a review published in an American journal said lobotomy can't hurt you. You're either going to get cured, improved, or no change.
Yeah, I probably marked that page in here somewhere.
So the point is, when you go to
Yeah.
universities and you study, really what you're being told is what the guild wants you to learn in order to move into how they've designed the practices.
Yeah.
And then you go into the science literature, and there's this whole different story there, which actually tells, and this arises from like NIMH funded research that tells like, wow, we're probably worsening outcomes. We're doing damage.
Yeah.
On the whole, in the aggregate, we're worsening outcomes.
Yeah.
And of course, then the biggest thing, I bet you were taught about chemical imbalances as you went, right?
Oh,
It's
yeah,
still
they still are. I
still in
talk
the
about this.
still in there.
My son just graduated college and took a intro to psych class or whatever. There was a whole chapter about the serotonin imbalance theory and all of these things, and I'm like, I said to him, I said, "Don't pay attention to this chapter at all. Like, please don't pay attention to this." But it's still being taught in colleges today. Yeah.
You know what's so distressing about the chemical imbalance story is so it arises in 1965 based on an understanding, or at least a preliminary understanding, of how antidepressants or antipsychotics act on the brain. So antipsychotics block dopamine. They hypothesize too much dopamine is the cause. Antidepressants, they block the reuptake of serotonin. So serotonin is staying in that synaptic cleft longer, upping serotonin activity. So they hypothesize that, okay, maybe depression is due to too little serotonin. Now, here's the distressing part. That's 1965. Now, if you start charting, now, of course, once they have that hypothesis, they have to see, do people with the schizophrenia have too much dopamine prior to going on the meds? Or do people with depression have too little serotonin? Well, now you can trace it and think about how long ago this is. Take the low serotonin theory. 1973, you get people saying, we're not finding serotonin is deficient in depressed patients. In 1983, I think it was, the NIMH does a big investigation of it and says, it doesn't look like there's a deficiency in serotonin. Okay, that's 1983. 1998, textbook of American psychiatry says this serotonin hypothesis didn't pan out. That's what the textbook says. It says we investigated all these different ways. We just didn't find it. There's no evidence for it. And they even make fun of it in their own textbook. They said there's really no reason that that the pathology is going to be the opposite of a mechanism of action of a drug you're using. So it was declared dead in 1998. And you can go forward. And what was American Psychiatry telling us on its website, in press releases, in magazine articles? They're telling us we now know that depression is a brain illness caused by serotonin and drugs fix that. So here's what's so outrageous and why you should be outraged. And frankly, I'm outraged that your son is being taught this nonsense. The profession knew it wasn't true. They knew it really starting in the 80s, but then they kept saying it because it was a soundbite that made their drugs look good, and it made it look like they had made all this medical progress discovering the pathology of disorders. In other words, we had a medical guild that thought it was okay to lie to patients, lie to the public, and really lie to itself. And even training of young doctors for a while we're hearing this.
Yes.
Can I tell you one really quick, funny story about this?
Please.
After I wrote Anatomy of an Epidemic, I was asked to give a grand rounds at Massachusetts General Hospital, which was like the #1 hot psychiatric department in the country in terms of research funding. Now, they invited me to crush me, basically. It was a setup.
Fun.
But one of the things they said on me, they said, you made it, they were lambasting. They said, you made it seem like we believed in the chemical imbalance story. They said, we knew that wasn't true in 1987, 25 years ago. So why did you lie about us? And I said, you know what? You're right. You did know it hadn't panned out in 1987, but I said, I think you forgot to tell the public.
Yeah.
Well, this reminds
Mic
me,
drop.
what was it in 20 well, was it in 2022 when the Mark Horowitz did the meta-analysis paper and said basically the serotonin theory, like we knew?
Yeah. Oh, there goes her volume. Hang on. One moment. Right when you're asking a great question about Mark and your volume goes out here. Are you back, Terry? Yeah, no, she's not. No volume. Well,
I know what her question I think is going to be.
yeah, I was going to say you could probably answer this before she even gets it all out. So, yeah, go ahead.
The point of the paper was by Mark Horowitz and Joanna Moncrief. They said, we reviewed all the research, 50 years of research into this. 55 research, and there was never any evidence for a low serotonin as being the cause of depression. So what was the response of other psychiatrists? Well, one of the responses, well, we've known this all along, so why are you even bothering with this? This isn't news.
Right.
And the
Right.
public listening to this goes, well, it's news to us.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that was there was various responses by psychiatrists, but they were trying to downplay it. But they made it seem like they had never told the public about chemical imbalances. And yet what we did on Mad in America, we just published a list of all the times they said exactly that.
Yes.
And that
Repeatedly.
antidepressants fix the chemical imbalance. I don't mean to be laughing, because just to finish this up, so many people's lives were changed by that story. They were having difficulty or a little bit of things. They go in to see a psychiatrist, or maybe even their general practitioner, because they're told they have a chemical imbalance. Of course, there was no test, which tells them there was something defective inside them, and told them that in essence they had to take this drug for life. Now, just as we try to understand the morality of this, imagine if you went to a cardiologist and they told you, "Oh, you have a problem with your heart. I need to put in a stent," and you didn't have that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
What would we say about the cardiologist?
Quack.
Do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're a
That's
quack.
painful. Why were psychiatrists allowed to tell people they had chemical imbalances in the brain, which required a drug, when they knew that wasn't true?
And that is still that narrative. As deep prescribers, Terry and I are working with people constantly. And that's questions that I do ask, because it's something that we have to like debunk and educate our clients on, because they get curious about getting off medication. But that is these are the statements that they hinge on, that we have to deprogram for them and then offer some research on, offer them other personal experience on, because they're still being told that. People are still being told that. I had a client this last week who said those exact words to me, and I just sit and listen, and then I said, okay, let's talk about the other side of this right now. So then we bring that in, and they're dumbfounded. It's as if they have learned something that is brand new, even though this is something that has been out for so long.
It's been out
Yeah.
it's been out in the research literature. It's been
Yeah.
out in Mad in America. It was in my books, but the media also betrayed us, because the media wasn't reporting this. You
Right.
still heard for the longest time that depression was due to low serotonin. So
Yes.
the media
Yes.
betrayed us as well.
Well, and I have to, this leads into a question I have. So this last week, or 2 weeks ago, I rewatched Medicating Normal. Okay. And in that documentary, you were filmed in that. You did a great job, by the way. It looks so good.
I love that film.
I know, it's so good.
Good
And I was hoping you could explain to our listeners something that you did a really good job explaining in that documentary. And it was about research and the length of research that the drug companies do, but then also these ghostwriters that are in the background, that are producing some of the literature here that's going out, and how that is then passed on. And I want to tell the whole story because you told it so well, but then how that's passed on to the people that are conducting the research to approve, etc. Can you explain that to our listeners, and how this process of research actually works for these drug companies?
Yeah, this is really key, because when we talk about the efficacy of antidepressants, for example, what they cite are studies done funded by drug companies, okay?
Yeah.
And they last about 6 weeks usually. And the whole goal is to find out if their drug reduces depressive symptoms on like the Hamilton scale better than placebo. Now, the first thing, even before we get into the corruption, the studies are biased by design to make the drug look good. So first of all, they use exclusion criteria, and about 85% of real world patients can't qualify for these trials, okay?
Yeah.
So they're a selected group. That's first. Second, there's no placebo group in these trials. What happens is you take people generally that are on antidepressants, or maybe they have exposure to, but mostly they're on antidepressants. Then what you do is you take one group off, okay? You take both groups off, but then one group you put back on an antidepressant after you do like a 4-day washout, they call it. So
Oh.
for
unless
the
you
love
take
of God.
everybody off, there's even a hope that this will spike depressive symptoms, by the way.
Yes, correct. That's what
Yeah,
you're
and
going
it
to have
will.
withdrawal. So the
So
drug
Yeah.
work
yes, yes,
great.
and then what they do is they take one group after the 4-day washout and put them back on an antidepressant, and the other is now the placebo group. So your placebo group is actually a group going through withdrawal. Now the amazing thing is, after at the end of 6 weeks, there's actually, in terms of diminishment of symptoms, very little difference between the two. Okay. Now, so what happens? So that's the design of the trials. Now, the drug companies, they've designed the trial. They get the case report forms. They hire people to collect the data and write up reports. Okay. Here's what we're going to say. They even have a ghostwriting firm. And then they go to their people on the academic people who maybe have supposedly recruited a few patients for these trials and ask them to be authors. And this went on for a long time. And by the way, those academic people are getting paid now lots of money to be what's called key opinion leaders. They know these people who are at prestigious universities. If they author the articles, they then write about them in the textbook, so antidepressants are effective. They give CEU courses. They speak at the annual conference of the American Psychiatric Association. They help form the opinion. But beneath all this story of the short-term efficacy of antidepressants is a story of biased design, no real placebo group, and the results being promoted to the public by academic faculty who are making thousands and thousands of dollars, and sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, to influence opinion in among the public. So that's what you see in the short-term studies. Now, so in other words, we really can't even trust that these drugs are effective over the short term.
Right.
Okay, but let's even grant that maybe they are. I actually don't. For example, I'll give you one thing real quick. I'll stop. When you give antidepressants in real world patients, the response rate is much less. The remission rate is much less than in these industry funded trials, dramatically less, which tells you that those trials are sort of an artifact. Then the other part of this is, and now you as therapists are seeing this all the time, long term, so many people worsen on these drugs.
Oh, yeah.
Not everybody, but a lot. And in aggregate, outcomes over and over again in the studies are worse for the medicated patients long term than for the unmedicated patients with a similar diagnosis. But we never hear about that research, do we?
No.
They don't tell us that research. Your patients don't come in and going like, hey, I just read that very few people stayed well in the largest antidepressant trial ever conducted. Could it really have been only 3% were well at the end of 1 year? They don't know this.
Yeah.
They don't know anything about the real world patients. They don't know about the bias design. What they see is, the New York Times say antidepressants are effective.
Yes.
70% of people are in remission after 1 year. It's just, and they say this and based on a study that hid the real outcomes. Anyway, this is the point. Sorry, I went on long term.
No, this is good.
I'm
You're good.
spellbound by you right now. I'm just
going.
The corruption in the short term is just part of a larger story of how the public has been misled about how the evidence is gathered, the role of key opinion leaders, and what happens over the long term. And let me now really get on my high horse. They were told that antidepressants fix the chemical imbalance in the brain, right?
Yes.
What research showed was that they didn't have a chemical imbalance before they went on the drug, but the drug, because
Created it.
Yeah, the drug now creates the very thing. So you have a drug that ups serotonergic activity. What does the brain do? It says, I have to maintain a homeostatic equilibrium. It dials down its own serotonergic machinery. And as Stephen Hyman wrote in 1996, at the end of this process, the brain is now operating in a manner that is both qualitatively and quantitatively different than normal. He was head of the NIMH when he wrote this. Have you had a single patient come in and go like, I know these drugs induce the chemical imbalance?
Yeah. No,
And
we're
for
usually the
me,
ones
me,
we're
I did.
except for us. We're usually the ones that are telling our personal stories or educating on that. But no, we don't get patients that come in and say
and then
that.
finally, this is seen as the mechanism The reason that long-term outcomes are so poor, you can actually read in the research literature, is they're inducing a change opposite of what is intended,
Yep.
and that may lead to a tardive dysphoria. And by the way, the latest data shows that 50% of people who go on an antidepressant end up with, quote, treatment-resistant depression,
Oh God,
as if
here we go.
it's their problem. You know what it was
Oh.
you know what it was in 1990? 10%. Obviously, what the drugs are doing are inducing a chronic depression in a significant percentage of people.
Yeah.
But you guys read Mad in America,
Mhm.
so you know this, and it's coming from the research, but the public doesn't know this.
Yeah.
It's funny because just this morning I had a comment on social media because I did a post about how when I was prescribed, it was a preventative for depression, for postpartum depression. I was not depressed. So I'm actually the poster child for, becoming depressed afterwards and numbed out and whatever and not starting that way. And so I made a post about it and somebody goes, "You blamed your husband and then you blamed the antidepressant. Why can't you just accept that you have treatment resistant depression?"
Oh. Well, they brought
And
Steve into this.
yeah.
Woo!
And I was like, "Or why can't you accept that I was never depressed in the first place? And this actually caused a cascade
Caused it,
of
yeah.
problems in my life during that time." Like, this is that spellbinding, wake up call for people. I feel like I'm the poster child for that because I'm the perfect example of somebody who didn't get on one because they were labeled as depressed, and what it did to me after. I should have been in a clinical trial. I was my own clinical trial.
Yeah,
Forget doing your original research, right? Like we
Yeah.
need to go back and get you in your own little trial.
Right.
You could be the placebo group and the control group
That's
and all
right.
the above.
but notice the defense of the drugs there. They're
Yes.
discounting your own personal experience.
100.
You're not an authentic narrator of your own life.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
are not at all. Yeah,
Right.
yes,
How
that's
dare I?
happening, and that's one of the biggest things when we are talking with our clients about this. Terry and I just had this come up very recently with a client that I am seeing who went and posted something online about how grateful that client is for meeting me, knowing that I understand how to deprescribe, right? Being able to like look at the Maudsley guidelines and try to help create something for her that's going to work, right? And the amount of slandering that this girl got online was just unbelievable. And what they don't know is that we put so much stock in her own agency when we started these discussions. Like, how do you want to do this? What makes sense for you? Tell me about your lifestyle. Like, this drug is here, but we're going to work, it's going to be you that gets you off of this. And you're going to pay attention to everything happening in your body. And that's going to dictate how powerful this goes and how long it takes. And, educating on withdrawal and how there's so much misnomer around, because that's the first thing her prescriber said to her is, hey, when these symptoms come back, it's because like you probably need to go back on.
Right.
And this language that is used around it, and it just removes anybody's own sense of agency within the process. And it's the drugs that are the thing that fixed everything, and they are the thing that you're going to have to go back on when withdrawal occurs, because clearly your original symptomology is back.
Yeah.
um
You know what's so
yeah,
disheartening about this? At the heart of good medicine is listening to the patient.
that's just
Right.
it. That's just
That
it.
would be it, right?
No,
That's
it's
it.
not. It is not. That is a lie among lies among I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
In
that is.
utopia, it is for sure. Mhm.
And think about with even the literature of antidepressants, okay? Even
Mhm.
if you believe it, most people aren't, the majority of people are not responding well to the drug. They're not remitting. The majority are not remitting, which means there's plenty of people who say, well, I'm still depressed, right?
Mhm.
Well, that actually fits. You don't even have to say that the depression to start here is the drugs are causing the chronic depression. You just know that drugs not working,
Right.
Yeah.
right? So we
I
can
think
listen to
people
them.
I think people innately know when something is not working or not
Yes.
helping, and we're led to believe that it's a problem with us. Like, well, that's a you problem.
Mhm.
You need more meds then, and you need another med, and you need this, and you need that. And i- if if this theory of chemical imbalance and then the answer is medication were legit and it actually worked, we would have solved depression. Like there would not be depression, there would not be anxiety. And how in the world does the same medication address anxiety and depression? Like I don't understand that at all. Like how does an SSRI address both? Like what? They should
Yes,
be two separate
Weight
things,
loss
but yet
and weight loss too.
and weight loss
Dresses
too.
weight
Yep,
loss
weight loss
too.
too.
Let's put
All
all
the
the
things.
categories in there.
And
Hey,
if
Yep.
it's
you're
a
unhappy in
catch-all.
your marriage, it's good for an unhappy marriage.
Yeah. Oh yes.
Those commercials, Bob, those commercials that were in the documentary and Medicating Normal, that's what the propaganda around, the early commercials of these, and everything you struggle with as a wife or as a mother within your marriage with your kids, like that is how it was fed to the world. Like
Mhm.
Yeah,
the
early on.
pain point marketing, and it's
Oh,
genius
it's
and it
genius.
works.
It's
Because you get on
genius.
the drug, and next thing you know, you're walking on the beach with a beautiful person.
That's
Life
right.
is
Yeah.
great.
Oh my
But
God, he
watch out
probably looks like
because
Sean Connery. Oh,
but
God,
it's okay
insane.
that your anus is bleeding and you've lost your lower limbs though, because you're not
Yes.
depressed anymore.
Yes. Or
I'm
you have
like,
some metabolic syndrome now that is
yeah.
is creating such a problem within your life that now you have diabetes and now your blood pressure is is
Mhm.
is tanked, and yep, like all of the medical implications that are being tied to not only these drugs but also the removal of them from the body.
But
And
that's okay because as
yep.
long as it saved your life.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. Like it is such a hard shift to these are life-saving, and how dare you talk about something that is saving lives every day. And I'm like, they're also taking lives every day, whether it's through taking their own life or just taking the pleasure of life away. But people can't see that. They can't see the other side of that at all.
You should. There's an article that appeared in JAMA, I think 2 weeks ago. It's written by, I think his name is Oker Dost, and he's the editor. He's a psychiatrist, and he's the psychiatric editor of for psychiatric topics for JAMA. And here's what he says, what he confesses to. Now he's going to defend the drugs in here, but he confesses life expectancy and functional outcomes have deteriorated in the last several diagnoses, last several decades for major mental disorders, including mood disorders and obsessive compulsive disorder. So you just said that the narrative is they save lives. In fact, life expectancy for people so diagnosed has gone down.
Yeah.
Functional outcomes have gone down. Now, he admitted that, and that's because the evidence of that is overwhelming. I wrote about this in Anatomy of an Epidemic. Now, he tries to say it's not the drugs.
Yeah.
It's just conditions of
Other things, yeah, conditions of living,
Lifestyle.
right?
It's your
Yeah.
lifestyle. Mhm.
But the point is, Dr. Teralyn, you were talking about this narrative that they save lives. It's just not true in the aggregate, okay? It's just
Mhm.
that's just like an anecdotal thing that gets passed on. And just to go back, why did that patient of yours get trashed online for saying that she had problems? I think you mentioned something like that, right, Jen? That
Yeah. Yeah, she was putting out something to share with this was in a
It
group
was in
that
a
was
tapering group,
it was in a
actually.
tapering group.
Mhm.
And she had put a post out indicating how grateful she was to have met a therapist who also knows deprescribing and can speak this language and also who has personal experience with it, right? So that's that to me matters too, and to her mattered as well, because it's not somebody who's just reading out of a manual. Okay. And so she was putting that out there to talk about how grateful she is and that she's done a couple titrations and listed out like the numbers by which she was titrating, and she was slandered for that in this community, and that was being done wrong, and you should really, I hate to tell you, but your therapist doesn't know what she's talking about, and this is dangerous. And then also her psychiatrist was saying to her, you're going to get worse, your symptoms are going to be bad, you're going to probably have to go back on, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a couple different things there.
I just the reason it made me stop and want to talk about this. It's just so hard sometimes to confront another narrative,
Mhm.
Yeah.
especially in
Yeah.
this world of social media. And because so often your journey is going to get your decisions are going to get trashed. And when we see a defense of psychiatry, defense of the drugs, I think it's because often people are using the drugs, they have to continue to believe in them, or
Yeah.
or unless they're going to think that maybe I made a huge mistake. So they have to sort of like attack someone who's making a different decision.
Mhm.
I mean, the nastiness sometimes towards people who challenge this narrative as patients is stunning. It's so nasty sometimes. It's so dismissive. And of course, it just adds to the difficulty of getting your life back. I don't know how, you know, Dr. Teralyn, you felt. I mean, I'm sure you've gotten some pushback.
Oh,
Well,
that's the understatement of the century.
she gets it real hot on social media. Like
I
it's
do.
pretty.
I do,
It's entertaining for
but
me.
I'm cool with it because if it raises conversation, you know, and it's
Yeah.
and I get both sides. I get very encouraging and I get extremely discouraging, but I'm in the middle here now. In the beginning, I wasn't. I was more hurt by like, oh, how can you not see this? You know, whatever. Like, it's not me. It's not me. And now I'm like, good. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's keep this
Mhm.
going as long as it's productive in some way. But it's this idea that um bringing in the alternative is so hard for people. I believe now that the people that are saying these things, like, it saves lives and how dare you talk about it, like, they don't believe in informed consent, number one, because they think if you're talking anything negative about an outcome, that that person then won't take their meds. And how terrible would that be if they did not take their meds because they decided that these side effects wouldn't be worth risking, you know? And I'm like, I don't even think that's the reality. I think there was some research out there that suggested that, you know, the rapport, and if you are open and honest with your client, the more likely they are to comply with your treatment recommendation. But anyway, the whole full informed consent thing is no, we can only say the positive stuff about this. But I firmly believe that the majority of people who are, you know, bitching and crabbing on my page and, you know, yelling at me are truly the med harmed at this point. I believe that they are so harmed that they can't see outside of it. They are so irritated and irritable and negative, and they're the ones who are harmed.
Well,
And so I'm like,
they're spellbound, right? Like
yeah,
as
they're
Peter
spellbound. I'm like,
Brigham coined, right?
stay,
They
yeah,
are in that state
yeah.
of this
So
does
I'm like,
work
stick
and
around on my page for a while and maybe that'll help you to see some new things. But I'm firmly believe that they are the truly harmed ones right now. Because how can you not be if that's the way you live your life? But, you know, I
yeah.
recognize the negativity because I was there, you know, when I was on meds too. So, I see them. I see them and I'm like, hang out here for a while. Let's see if we can do anything. So that's where I'm at right now. Thick-skinned,
Oh, that's a
thicker
nice way
skinned.
to put it. You do need thick skin. I agree with you, by the way.
Mhm.
It's so much of this outrage is from people who actually aren't doing well, and they almost can't bear the thought that you know they've gone down a medical path that has had such made life so difficult for them. They
Mhm.
have to defend that decision to stay on the to be on the drug and stay on the drug.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
that's
I
why
I don't disagree.
why they attack people who are saying, "But wait a minute, look, I'm getting my life back by rejecting this whole narrative."
Yes, and that's a hard pill to swallow when it's been part of, like, your whole life, right?
Exactly.
And especially with clinicians, because we really love to challenge that with clinicians, because we are taught the opposite, you know, we are taught that there has to be, when you were saying evidence-based, right? Like, we like to make fun of that a lot on this show because that was how we were trained, the evidence-based gold standard, right? And that's it. That is the level of care we gave, but we were trained that psychiatry and mental health are in a marriage. And that is the most effective way to help a patient. And so that narrative, right? Even for a lot of people, like even clinicians, they challenge that a lot with us. Because they're still learning it that way. That's how it's being taught to them too. Um, and so that's a hard thing to get over when you have to sit and go, yeah, this I was taught the thing something that's wrong. That doesn't make sense. Or I've hinged my practice on this for 20 years and it's not right. No
Yeah,
way.
listen, one of the most heartfelt things that a psychiatrist told me after she read Anatomy of an Epidemic, she says, "Okay, I think you're right. I think we're doing harm, but now you have to tell me how I go to work tomorrow. How do I
Yeah.
forgive myself for the past 25 years? And now how can I even exist in a system that's doing harm?"
Yep.
I didn't really have an answer, but that was obviously a heartfelt thing she was saying. Her mind was open to it, but she was saying like, how am I going to, how about myself? How do I
Right.
look at what I've been doing for 25 years? I thought I was helping people. And this is what
Yeah.
so it is, and it's easier just to have cognitive dissonance. You know what I mean? Okay, I'm not going
Mhm.
to this information.
Yeah, no, it takes a lot of vulnerability. I think one of the harder episodes that Terry and I did on this show was our 30th episode, and we called it our Dirty 30.
30-30.
And in
Mhm.
that episode, we listed off the 30 most horrific ways that we perpetuated harm to our patients as therapists. And it was sad how easy it was for me to make that list. We each made our lists, right? And then we combined them and it just like flowed out of me so easy. And I sat back looking at this going, there's so much harm I've done. So much harm. And we openly talk about it, but that takes such a level of like humility and
Mhm.
vulnerability, and because you don't know what's going to come at you after you tell the world something like that on a podcast, right?
Sure.
But that's how we did it. And I to your point with her saying to you, how do I move on, right? I think there's a level of humility that you have to get to in your own space and go, this is harm. And we had somebody on not too long ago, Nicole Lamberson, and she talked with us about this. And she said, she goes, the most unforgivable thing. It's forgivable when you don't have the knowledge and the awareness, and you're taught something and you don't have the other perspectives. But what's really unforgivable is when you now have the knowledge and that there's more to this, right, than what you were taught. And yet you still continue to operate in the same fashion you did. That's the part that's unforgivable, right?
That's what she said there is exactly right.
Yeah.
Mhm. When
Yeah.
you are provided with other information, you have a moral duty
You
to do
do.
right by your patients and change your thinking and what you tell your patients and all that.
So I have a quick question if my internet holds out. So sorry about that, everybody. Um, all the research that you're finding, how does the general population find some of this? Because like you said, like it's just the high side of things that this is working is readily available everywhere. Like you see it in pop news too, right? Like
Yeah.
so, but how do you go about finding some of this other research on the other side? How do you go about finding that? And how do you know the legitimacy of that? I think it's important for our listeners to understand this part.
This is really a great question. So even with my first book, Mad in America, I put up a website where I had all the citations and links to the articles, and so they could see for themselves what I was citing. They could go read it for themselves, and they could also see where it was published. And these things would be they'd see that it was funded by the NIMH, or then it was published in American Journal of Psychiatry sometimes, or Archives of General Psychiatry. In other words, that they could go to the source information so they could read it for themselves. Now, the one problem with this sometimes is that the abstracts are spun. You have to be able to really get into like look at tables and the discussion and comments there, because the abstracts are spun. But nevertheless, I did that. Now, when Anatomy of an Epidemic, initially I just did the same thing on Mad in America. It wasn't a webzine at this time. But then gradually it did become a webzine. And we now, for example, we have daily science coverage.
Mhm.
There's always a link to the study.
Yep.
Okay. So
Yep.
the whole point is we're trying to make available research that never gets promoted by the mainstream media. We review it, we review the methodology, the findings, how it fits, and then there's a link. Now, often this stuff is behind paywalls. So one of the things we're trying to do is bring it that science from behind the paywall and make it available to the public. And then finally, you can go on Mad in America and you look at the menu bar and you look at drugs.
Yep.
And there's a drop down menu, and it'll say like antipsychotics adults, or antidepressants adults, or stimulants children. And then you'll go there and there'll be a review of the literature. What is the evidence for short term? What do we know about adverse effects? What are the long term studies? And there's links. There's hyperlinks to every study.
Yep.
So what we're trying to do, this is one of the reasons for Mad in America, is to make access to this research known. That you don't have to believe me, but you can now go read these things. But again, I do want to say one of the small problems is they never confess bad results in the abstract.
Right.
Yep.
You really
No,
have
they don't.
you really
Mhm.
have to be good about looking at the tables, and when they'll make a discussion that's sort of an admission
Mm-hmm.
of of harm done, but then they'll move on.
Yes.
But that's the
Rapidly.
but it's there, and I will can I say one thing?
Yeah.
In Mad in America and Anatomy of an Epidemic, I don't know how many studies are cited. I think there's over 700 studies
Yeah,
cited.
there's a lot. Mm-hmm.
Do you know I've never had a single author say I miscited their findings? Never. Not once. Oh, and the other thing is they've never said I misquoted them because I quote them from their own.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. I love it.
So this is what they said.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Uh-huh. I know.
and one of the things just to finalize this, it's not that there's just like one study that tells this, and then there's this other data out there that tells of drugs improving long-term outcomes. When you look at long-term data, it's consistent across different types of studies, longitudinal studies, epidemiological studies, studies that are looking about how the drugs affect the brain over long term. And then you'll get researchers saying, uh-oh, I think we're worsening the long-term outcomes. Now, it's
Yeah.
never promoted, but it's there. And it's there because, in fact, that's what science is showing us. So,
Mm.
Terry, what your question is really a good one. How can they believe this information? How can they believe the narrative that we're telling? Well, they can believe it because we have access to all the research that's done by themselves. This isn't even research by the critics. This is their research,
Right.
NIH funded research, and that's what we're making available. It's the best we can do. Um, it's hard for people to switch narratives, but I will tell you, more and more people are switching narratives. And two things have happened just on this. A few years ago, there was a meeting in India, and it was an INTAR meeting, and it brought together people from the World Health Organization, United Nations, and I was asked to be a keynote speaker. Amazingly.
Was it a setup? That's what I'm just kidding. Was it another setup?
No, this
Oh,
was
okay, good.
because the people themselves felt there was something wrong.
Oh, good.
Anyway, one of the things that came out of that was my talk was we need a new narrative, because not just a critical narrative, but a narrative of what's possible that would that would help prompt a paradigm shift. Well, you know what has happened from representatives who were there? The World Health Organization representatives, they have now sent several documents saying we need a paradigm shift. This biological model really hasn't worked. We need a shift towards environmental care and away from this biological model. The UN Special Rapporteur for Health, who had a representative there, Danius Puras, he's no longer, he's finished his term. He said we need a revolution. We need a paradigm shift. And the reason is because that's what you find if you're at the World Health Organization, at least in one department, and you confront this research literature. You say, this isn't working. We need to be doing something differently. So what I'm trying to tell your listeners is, even at very top levels now, increasingly, there's an acknowledgement. Outcomes have gotten worse. This isn't working. The chemical imbalance story was a fraud, and we really need to rethink this whole paradigm of care.
Do
Which
you
is so
think in the
cool. Like
next,
that just gives me
well,
goosebumps.
do you think in the next 20 years somebody else is going to write another book, or you're going to be able to write another book about this and be like, what were we thinking in 2025? Do you think that it's going to shift at some point, that we're going to look back on this time period and be like, damn, we just created so many problems. What were we thinking? Do you think that's going to happen in your lifetime?
I hope so.
Yeah.
And, one of the things is when there are paradigm shifts, you look back at the past and go, what were we thinking?
Right. It's always that, right?
Yeah.
It's always that, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Once we got the drugs, we like, what were we thinking when we were, destroying
Yeah.
the frontal lobes? That wasn't so bright. But I don't know, really. It's just, corporate influences are so big on our lives now.
Yeah.
And the market for psychiatric drugs just became huge.
It is. Yep.
And it got exported around the world. When we first started medicating our kids, people in other countries said, what are you doing? Like, these are just kids. Well, increasingly, they're diagnosing their kids with autism spectrum disorder, ADHD. I went to Poland I was invited to speak in Poland and Slovenia last November. And people are telling me all their kids are getting diagnosed with these things. So
Yep.
it's spread. So I wish I could be optimistic. There are a lot of calls now. We need a paradigm shift. There's really a grassroots rebellion, and there is this happening in societies. It doesn't work. So your burden of mental disorders, rather than going down, which means a cost, it's going up. So at some point, you're saying we're spending all this money, but it's not solving the problem. So maybe we do need to make a change. I hope that happens, but as you know, economics influence political decision big time.
Yeah.
Corporations have an outsized influence. The pharmaceutical industry has an outsized influence. So I don't know. Is the industry going to really let go of this model of care? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And to wrap up on that idea, it would be great to be a part of that revolution. I mean, like, here we are as like the tiny people, trying to do that on our end and helping people and educating them and trying to help them safely get off of these drugs, which is a whole feat in and of itself, right? There isn't a lot of people out there doing that. But it's growing, which is really cool. But it would be neat to be part of this revolution. I mean,
you are part of this revolution.
Yeah,
you are part of it. That's the point.
we are.
The Gaslit Podcast is part of the revolution. It's a rebellion coming up from the grassroots.
It is.
So you're very much part of it.
Yeah. We want to see more. I guess I want to see more. I would love to just see like the big boom, which probably won't happen because, as we know, there are these influences that are they are so much bigger than us. And in fact, they could crush us in a hot second if they wanted to. So I'm kind of waiting for somebody to show up at my door and threaten my life. And then I'll be like, listen, I worked at a prison for 15 years. You don't fucking scare me. But then I'm sure at some point, right? Like, and I've had people say this to me. They're like, you guys are starting to touch on some shit that you need to be really careful with when it comes to big food and big pharma. And I'm like, okay.
I'm too old to worry about that at this point. So.
Like, all right. Well, it's a good space to wrap up. And thank you for being here, Bob. You've changed so many lives. If you knew how big of an impact you've had on the world, I hope can feel some of that.
Well, thanks. It's really been a pleasure being here. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And when I hear words like this, I think, okay, it's worth continuing.
Yes, I think that's the important part, isn't it?
Encouragements, right? But thank you for being on, everybody. If you've stayed to the end here, we are the Gaslit Truth Podcast. You can find us anywhere that you listen to your podcast. We are on all the socials, and we love for you to give us some reviews. And as Terry said with her book, we only want 5 stars with our podcast too. Otherwise, don't even review. And if you're not willing to think critically or go through that, then I guess we're not the podcast for you. If you want to send us your gaslit stories, you can email us at the gaslittruthpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for being on, Bob.
Again, it was a real pleasure.